Hi, everyone. My name is Moksha. I'm one of the EERC Fellows. And over these past 11 months, we've been working with the Energy Equity Researchers Collaborative. As you can see from the name, this is a group of people who are invested in the energy equity space. These are people not only working in academia, but also in state energy offices, nonprofit research institute, and consulting groups. They're involved in designing, researching, and implementing federal and state level policies. This group came together in October 2021 in response to the growing need for understanding the role of energy, of equity and justice in energy efficiency space and clean energy programs. Specifically, Justice 40, which is a key environmental justice initiative of the Biden administration, which requires that 40% of the benefits from the clean energy investments need to go to disadvantaged communities, unleashed a demand for technical assistance for developing energy equity metrics. The group recognized this need, but they also acknowledged the fact that most of this research today is created and disseminated by a small group of people. So they decided to build this collaborative, which will center BIPOC and frontline communities and create research that is driven by communities' needs rather than policymakers' priorities and academic researchers' agenda. Our job over these past 11 months has been to support this group develop its internal frameworks and move towards a path of becoming a long-term organization, finally reaching a goal of becoming a cohesive energy equity and justice network. Now I will pass on to Kat to talk about our first deliverable.
So our first deliverable was to kind of live by the values of the EERC, so to actually engage the members and to interview them. And the purpose of our interviews was to gauge their shared goals, desires, and values for the collaborative and to elevate the diverse viewpoints of members of the collaborative because the collaborative itself is still made up of pretty diverse membership. Of the 30 EERC members at the time, we were able to interview 20 of them one-on-one. We transcribed and analyzed the interview responses, presented our findings to the EERC at one of their quarterly meetings in the summer, and then we summarized our findings, which were relatively extensive, into a 2-page executive summary. And from those interviews, we identified some key recommendations that guided the rest of our work with the EERC, which is to establish a stronger sense for the EERC's shared mission and purpose as a collaborative and a pretty decentralized national collaborative, an organizational framework and leadership structure that's based on trust and the values of equity and justice, detailed rules that allow members to share resources and ideas with the understanding of how this information will be used. This is specifically important for frontline and BIPOC organizations who often experience information extraction. So how can the collaborative foster safe spaces for information sharing? And then a clear pathway for not only partnering, but centering the voices of BIPOC and frontline communities in the EERC's process of establishing itself. So I will pass it off to Fang.
Thanks, Kat. So from our membership interview, one of the observations that we made is that the ERC is a very diverse space with very diffuse leadership and decision-making processes. In fact, when we first joined the ERC as fellows, the ERC had met twice at that time, and they were developing their missions. They were also developing membership roles, but nothing has been fully solidified yet. So we saw this as an opportunity for us to fully engage with ERC members and shaping their governance structures and informing the development of the coalitions. Another challenge that we kind of came across during this time is that there was a timeline mismatch. And by that I mean within the fellowship's period of serving the ERC for 1 year, we recognize that there's a lot that we can do and there's a lot that we cannot do in terms of informing the ERC structures. So one of the things that we thought about is to be adaptable and to be flexible and to have an open mind in terms of making sure that our deliverables not only addresses and aligns with the ERC timeline, but also it serves the purpose of creating a coalition in which the ERC aims to become.
All right, so I'm Tara, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that coalition went into our deliverables. And so due to the nature of the coalition building process, we decided to have 2 final deliverables, and we broke out into working groups. And so the first team was a network database. And so what they were trying to do was create recommendations for how a database of not only the internal EERC members, but also other organizations that work within the energy equity space could be created. And so this database would basically have the type of member organization, what their missions were, and just kind of the projects they're working on to make sure to promote collaboration in a more effective way within the energy equity space. And then our other project was a governance proposal, which was very long and it's a little hard to summarize. But basically, this framework built upon work that the EERC had already done. And this was a lot of their goal-setting exercises. And so we had a multitude of recommendations that focused on maybe starting membership structures, capacity building, and also funding within the EERC. And so this had an impact beyond the project. The network database, like I mentioned, it helped kind of grow the collaborative, or it will help grow the collaborative and also help them network with other people working within a similar space. But more importantly, it will help BIPOC and frontline communities get access to the tools that they need. And so by having this network, it'll help the collaborative get to one of their goals that members had, which was to establish a policy and metrics hub that will really bring the research into a more public-facing space. And then the way that the governance proposal is more transferable is young coalitions can use this to kind of base if they're going to move their scope or define their membership roles. Also, as Kat mentioned, there is a history of extractive research within this space and other spaces. And so having the recommendations in this report will help create like a research ethic that will be scalable to other organizations. And then next, Claire will talk about our timeline.
Oh no. Okay, so we wanted to give you a brief and pretty high-level overview of our timeline. So like the rest of the cohort, we started in January and spent the following couple of months working with our clients to define the scope and define a couple of deliverables. And then between April and June, we worked on our first deliverable, so that's what Kat spoke about. So those were the interviews, the analysis, an executive summary, and then a presentation to the collaborative. And then for the rest of the summer, we actually worked to kind of re-strategize our scope based on the interviews, based on the rest of our timeline and our capacity. And we identified pretty clear next steps so that when we came back to campus in September, we could hit the ground running and finalize our last two deliverables, which Tara just spoke about. And then we think that this is hopefully only the beginning. So our hope is that the EERC will implement the guidance that we've offered over the next year-ish or start to do so. And we intentionally didn't set more granular time goals, in part because we recognize that the nature of the ERC, it's a collaborative. They're trying to do this work and these processes in a really collaborative and participatory way. And so because of that, the progress isn't going to be linear. It will probably take a while. And so for example, the governance proposal that we just spoke about, that will have to happen hand in hand with diversifying membership and strengthening the inclusion of BIPOC communities. So that's a little bit about our timeline, and then I'll pass it on to Caroline to wrap up.
So I would like to share a little bit more about our team. One of our favorite aspects of the Dow Fellowship is its intentional interdisciplinary approach. And as you can see here, our team members have very diverse educational and professional backgrounds. Most of our team members have a dual degree, and we also each bring diverse life experiences that have made our team stronger. At the start of this project, we were also all relatively or even completely new to the energy equity space. So we intentionally took an open-minded approach that enabled us to stay flexible, and we each took away new knowledge and lessons from this project. And just to make this whole thing a bit more tangible for you, we hope you'll take this opportunity to learn more about the importance of equity and justice in the global transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. The ongoing energy transition provides an opportunity for each of us to acknowledge the energy system's historical and cumulative burdens on marginalized communities. Those burdens include financial costs, environmental pollution, undue stress, and other health consequences, and more. The global energy transition also gives us a huge opportunity to implement projects and processes that can help rectify those injustices. To learn more, we hope you'll look into Justice 40, which Moksha described at the start of our presentation. We hope you'll consider important questions like, how exactly is a disadvantaged community defined or measured? How can you measure the benefits of clean energy? These are the kinds of questions that EERC members are exploring in their work. You can also connect with our advisor, Justin Schott, by reading about his work on the Energy Equity Project at the University of Michigan. And finally, to participate even more directly in the clean and just energy transition, we encourage you to get involved in local or statewide initiatives toward a zero carbon future. We are grateful to the Dow Corporation Foundation, the Graham Institute, and our multiple project advisors within the EERC. And thanks to all of you for your time and attention today.
Gotta be at least one.
I'm just curious to hear more about what this organization and this collaborative might look like in the future, and if it's tied to the presidency in any sense. Of like, I know this, it seems like this came out of some of the Biden administration's work on the Justice 40 initiative, and I'm just curious to hear if this work will continue regardless of the next administration.
I think that's a great point. I think that with the Inflation Reduction Act, things are going to shift because the Justice 40 recommendations aren't being followed the way that they were promised to be followed. I think that energy equity and energy justice work, like any justice work, is more important than ever. So I think that they're going to need to kind of build internal resiliency. And by centering the voices of those that need these transitions to be just the most, I think that inevitably the collaborative will pursue into the future, but I think they recognize a deep need to diversify their membership right now. Without that, the resilience of the collaborative won't be as strong as it needs to be.
I might jump into part of the thing that's a strength too with the collaborative is its researchers. So they're coming from governance space, from private sector, different areas. So where maybe if the governance section isn't quite on top of things with a new administration, maybe the private sector will step in. So, yeah.
Excellent. Other questions or comments?
I'm interested in the kind of the life cycle associated with the entity. Are there other, so this has a geographic tie to it. Are there other geographic regions that you see are maybe forming collaboratives or have already formed collaboratives that are similar to the one that is kind of evolving now?
So the EERC is actually national in scope. So I'm not familiar with regional initiatives. Yeah, so yeah, it was national. I'm sure there's international and regional similar initiatives, but one of the ideas was that the EERC was trying to do something that like filling a gap, basically where trying to make sure that the work isn't duplicative and that collaboration is happening instead of people working in silos on the same topic. So I don't know if there's similar things, but hopefully nothing exactly like this.
Well, how about globally then, since you brought up that?
I don't know about global.
I was just going to say, yeah, we weren't exploring international collaboratives, so I think that would be a good next step. But we actually suggested that the collaborative include international organizations, and that was kind of part of the network map processing, was to include international organizations within the growth of the collaborative.
Excellent.
Thank you for the presentation. I am curious about your governance recommendations, and specifically if the recommendations you gave for a smaller organization or an organization structured in this way, how those differ from maybe like traditional governance support and advice that would be given.
So your question was how the governance system that or the recommendations that we're putting forward are different than your regular organization. Well, I think the challenge in a way, and I think that's what makes justice complex, is that it's inherently collaborative. So it requires a level of patience that I think a lot of organizations don't operate by those values of patience. Like we had to really work within the bounds of the fact that the coalition only met once every 4 or 5 months, which ideally they would start meeting more often in order to kind of reduce like the burden of meeting 2 hours every 4 months, which is really hard to schedule. But from like a recommendation standpoint, it was really like the biggest takeaway from our work was that they didn't want to solidify anything until their membership was more diverse. And I think that inherently is quite different from the way a lot of people move forward. They'll typically do DEI after the fact. They're actually trying to weave DEI into the framework of what they do. I think that's quite different. And also they recognize that because they all work full-time, this is a voluntary-based coalition, the key is to build capacity. And so the most concrete next step that they're taking right now is they're building a proposal to hire a professional facilitator group because they themselves don't have the capacity to do all the logistical work that it takes to carry a collaborative like this forward. And they need to look into having the collaborative housed within one of the organizations of the EERC because they aren't an incorporated 501c3. They need someone to house their funding. So there's different steps that need to happen in this space, and they're not consolidating anything. And so part of the work that we feel is really equitable and the way we are using our funding is that we are actually going to allocate the rest of our budget as EERC fellows to the collaborative so that they can actually spend it on recruiting some BIPOC frontline organizations and providing them a small honorarium. It's not major, but the funding will be allocated after we step down from our role. So in a way, we're really trying to follow through on our commitments to equity in this work as well.
You made a point of mentioning that none of you were familiar with the space of energy equity when you started this work, but that you all had, I think you said you all had dual degree intentions. So I'm wondering if one of you would reflect on how going through the process of gaining the knowledge of this particular space has influenced your own view of your own disciplinary efforts.
Step in. Yeah, coming into this, I really thought energy equity was outside of my wheelhouse. For reference, I come from an urban planning and architecture background, and it made me realize just how ingrained this is in like architecture or built environment or communities. And just seeing, I mean, the community engagement aspect and even the governance structure and coalition building is an aspect that I never really considered within my own field, and I think it's really vital moving forward. So I want to start looking for those opportunities with it.
I also want to add one of the things we learned a lot. For example, I'm a dual with the public policy field in the School of Environment, but I'm actually doing a career pivot. I have never worked in this. I'm coming from financial markets. So there's a lot of talk about collaborative processes and policy design and implementation processes and implementation. But this was a really good learning experience to see how those processes actually work and what are the pitfalls. And it takes time. And how do you actually elevate all different members' voices but still reach a consensus? I think that was something that we talk a lot about in classes, but we don't necessarily see it play it out in action. And that was a great learning experience for me and for some of the other team members as well.
I can add one more. I have a very short addition, which is very concrete in answering your question, which is that in part because of this project, I ended up with an internship at the Environmental Protection Agency this summer, researching urban heat islands, which have huge implications for energy equity, because if you live in a hotter area of a city, then your energy bill is higher. You're also more likely to be lower income. Your building is likely to be less well insulated. And so there's just sort of cumulative consequences to that. And I was able to sort of speak to some of the things I've learned from this project in interviewing for that internship. And so I'm interested in kind of continuing to explore some of those topics as well. Thank you for your question.